The holographic map painted the dimly lit command center in shifting shades of blue and red, the glow casting long shadows across the room. The Tariq Valley floated in midair, a three-dimensional projection suspended above the table like a phantom landscape. Commander Nathan Reed stood at the head of a display, his hands resting lightly on the table's edge. He studied the red icons crawling in from the northeast. His expression was unreadable, but the tightness in his jaw said enough. "Enemy armor," he said at last, his voice calm, but carrying over the quiet hum of servers and comms chatter. 40-plus vehicles. At least 17 T-90s. They're pushing for the valley. Around him, officers leaned in to follow his gestures. The red wave was advancing toward the blue markers, their forces scattered like beads along the valley floor and surrounding ridgelines. Reed tapped 3 routes, winding through the map's mountainous contours. "If they take this ground," he continued, "they'll own 3 supply routes to the interior. We can't let that happen." Brigadier General Marcus Thorne, a broad-shouldered man whose uniform seemed to strain under the weight of his rank and presence, stepped closer. He had flown in from Central Command specifically for this briefing, his arrival a clear signal of the operation's strategic importance. "What's our play?" he asked. Reed didn't answer directly. Instead, he turned to Lieutenant Octavia Mercer, his tactical officer, a woman whose precision had earned her the call sign clockwork. "Lieutenant, walk us through." Mercer stepped forward, expanding the valley's southern approach on the map with a flick of her hand. The glowing terrain shifted, zooming in until it felt like you could almost step into it. "The 117th Mechanized will dig in here, here, and here." She marked 3 choke points in the valley. "Artillery will take these ridges. Drones will cover the flanks. Special operators will be positioned at high ground observation posts for live intelligence." Her delivery was crisp, rehearsed, until Thorne frowned and jabbed a finger at a solitary blue marker well outside the defensive perimeter. "What's that?" he asked. "That's nearly 8 kilometers from the predicted engagement zone." "Who's there?" "Captain Winters," Mercer replied without hesitation. 8 kilometers? Thorne's voice carried skepticism, bordering on disbelief. "And what exactly is she supposed to do out there?" "Count clouds." The comment drew a few quiet smirks from junior officers, though they disappeared the moment Reed's eyes swept over them. "She's providing comprehensive battlefield awareness," Reed said. The words were technically accurate, but his tone carried the weight of something rehearsed, as though it were the only answer he was authorized to give. "That position covers potential secondary approaches." Thorne stared at the marker for a beat longer, his frown deepening, then waved a hand. "Fine. Proceed." At the back of the room, the subject of discussion stood silently, as if the exchange had nothing to do with her. Captain Elise Winters was lean, average height, and almost unremarkable in appearance, the kind of soldier you could lose in a crowd. Her gear was minimal, stripped down to essentials. No bulky comrades, no flashy optics, no visible heavy weaponry. Her eyes, however, were different. Calm, steady, measuring. When the meeting adjourned and officers dispersed to issue orders, Mercer crossed the room to her. "That's quite a hike to your post," Mercer said. "You sure you don't want additional kit? We can get you a heavier loadout, extra drones." "This is sufficient," Winters replied, methodically checking the straps on her pack. "No backup? No spotter?" "Not required." Mercer tilted her head, studying her colleague. Something about Winters was different. It wasn't arrogance. She didn't carry herself like someone trying to prove a point. It was more like she had already run this mission in her head 100 times and knew exactly how it would end. "Well," Mercer said at last, "good luck out there." Winters looked up, her expression neutral. "Luck is a variable I try to remove from the equation." By late afternoon, the base was a hive of activity. Tanks and armored vehicles rumbled toward their positions, their engines growling over the clipped voices on the comms net. Drone operators ran last-minute calibrations. Artillery crews loaded and checked their ammunition, the clink of shells echoing in the hangars. Winters moved through the organized chaos without drawing attention. She didn't wait for an escort. No one was assigned to see her off. She simply shouldered her pack, adjusted the strap across her chest, and walked toward the waiting transport. The ride out was long and jarring, the kind of bone-rattling journey that left most soldiers grumbling. Winters didn't speak once. When the vehicle dropped her at a nondescript point along a dirt track and drove away in a cloud of dust, she simply began walking. The sun was already sinking toward the horizon, spilling gold and copper across the valley. 8 kilometers might as well have been 80 once you factored in the terrain: steep inclines, jagged outcrops, narrow goat trails winding between sheer drops. But she moved at a steady, unhurried pace, her breathing even. Halfway to her destination, she paused on a ridge and crouched, scanning the valley below. Her eyes lingered on the main enemy approach, the one every analyst and every sensor system was watching. Then she looked farther afield, into the folds of terrain no one had marked as relevant. She continued without a word. Night was falling by the time she reached her designated point. A small outcrop overlooked a stretch of winding dry riverbed. From here, she had a clear view of the valley mouth to the north and a secondary pass to the west. She unpacked quietly, setting up what looked like a basic optics kit, nothing high-tech enough to draw a systems check. From 8 kilometers away, she could hear faint echoes of artillery tests as the main force prepared for the fight. The wind carried the smell of dust and something faintly metallic, like old shell casings. She checked in overcoms at the scheduled time. Echo 7 in position. No contacts. Her voice was flat, emotionless, as if she were reporting on the weather. From the command center, her blue marker pulsed once on the holographic display. General Thorne barely glanced at it before turning back to the main engagement zone. Nobody in that room imagined she would matter in the next 12 hours. Nobody except Winters. The first shells landed just after midnight. From the command center's vantage point, the Tarik Valley came alive in flickers of heat signatures and movement trails projected on the holographic map. Red shapes surged forward in disciplined waves, their positions updating with mechanical precision as the Ares system digested feeds from drones, satellites, and ground sensors. General Thorne stood with his arms folded, watching with grim satisfaction. Exactly as predicted. The northern approach, textbook armored doctrine. Commander Reed nodded. Assault vehicles up front, command and control at the rear. They're keeping their most valuable assets insulated. The room hummed with controlled energy, officers issuing orders, updating positions, adjusting artillery ranges. It was the clean, abstracted war of 21st century command. Dots and lines, probabilities and projected outcomes. Far off on the western edge of the map, Captain Winter's blue marker sat alone, unmoving. Every 30 minutes, a small green icon pulsed over it. Her routine status check. No one paid it much attention. By 0130 hours, the valley's ridgelines thundered with artillery. Drone operators called out adjustments to their fire missions, and the airspace above the valley shimmered with a blur of small, fast-moving aircraft. Lieutenant Mercer, her headset tilted to one ear, was scanning live feeds when her eyes flicked to Winter's sector. "Commander," she said, keeping her voice level. Echo 7's transmission interval just slipped. Reed looked up from the tactical map. "How long?" 41 minutes since last check-in. Standard is 30. She was already pulling the comms log. Before that, intervals were irregular. 33 minutes. 37. This is the longest gap yet. Any emergency beacon? Negative. Transponder still active. Reed gave a short nod. "Flag it. Keep an eye on her sector." At 0200, the red wave continued to push into the valley. Allied artillery struck hard, slowing their advance, but the enemy formation remained tight, disciplined. And then, without warning, Winter's blue marker flickered. Once. Twice. Then it was gone. A communications officer looked up from his console. "Echo 7 transponder offline, sir. No distress signal." Thorne didn't even glance over. "She's in a low-priority zone. Non-essential. Our focus is here." He jabbed a finger at the northern choke point where the main clash was building. Reed hesitated, the shadow of a frown crossing his face, but gave the order anyway. Redirect Drone 7 to watch the main column. We need clearer visuals on their second echelon. Mercer's lips pressed into a thin line, but she said nothing. While the rest of the command staff tracked the battle's escalating fury, Specialist Abernathy sat at a side console, scanning lower priority satellite imagery. His job was to review areas outside the main engagement zone, the quiet spaces where nothing was supposed to happen. He was halfway through a yawning stretch when something flickered on his screen. A shadow moving along a ridge well inside enemy-controlled territory. It didn't match the clean, geometric tracks of friendly units. It didn't match the jagged, hurried paths of enemy scouts. It was deliberate. "Sir," Abernathy called, then hesitated. The Ares system had tagged it as a false positive. Heat distortion, probably. Bringing it up would just make him look green. Mercer noticed his hesitation. "What is it, Specialist?" He shook his head. "System glitch, ma'am." "Nothing." By 0300, the enemy was pressing hard against the southern flank, exactly as their doctrine dictated. The Ares map looked clean, ordered. No hidden threats, no unexpected flanking movements. And then something happened that made the room go still. On the holographic map, an enemy command vehicle, deep behind their front lines, vanished in a bloom of red. The system flagged it as destroyed. Source unknown. What was that? Thorne barked. "Not artillery," the fire control officer replied immediately. "Impact vector too shallow. Looks like a missile. Ground-based." "From where?" The officer hesitated. "From behind their formation, sir." "But there are no Allied units there." The room's ambient hum sharpened into confusion. Before anyone could process it, another high-value icon, the enemy's mobile air defense platform, flared and disappeared. "Second strike," the surveillance officer confirmed. "Same vector. Still no friendly assets in that zone." Reed's mind raced. The precision, the choice of targets, the perfect timing, it wasn't random. Whoever was out there knew exactly where to hurt the enemy most. He glanced toward Mercer, whose expression was neutral, but whose eyes told a different story. "Lieutenant," he said quietly, "what are you thinking?" "That sector," she murmured, "is near Captain Winter's last known position." "That's impossible." She'd have had to move several kilometers through enemy patrols, without tripping a single sensor. "Yes, sir," Mercer said. "Impossible. According to Ares." Reed held her gaze for a long moment. At 0345, a third strike took out the enemy's forward reconnaissance unit. This time, the red icons on the map wavered, their movements less coordinated. Enemy radio intercepts, piped through the Ares translation module, filled the air. "We're taking fire from inside our own lines." Sector 7 through 12, sweep immediately. Thorne's brow furrowed. Inside their own lines? How? But Reed was no longer listening to the general. He was watching the map with a growing realization that the battle was shifting. The enemy's confident push was faltering, and it wasn't because of anything the main Allied line was doing. Someone or something was cutting the head off the snake. Mercer didn't look away from her secondary feed. "Commander, I don't think Captain Winters is missing." Reed exhaled slowly. "No," he said. "I don't think so either." The enemy armor kept pushing, but now their movements carried hesitation. On the holographic map, red icons shifted unevenly, their formation fraying around invisible edges. At 0352 hours, another flare erupted on the tactical display, a logistics truck, heavy with fuel and ammunition, gone in a blossom of heat and debris. "Fourth strike," reported the surveillance officer, his tone caught between awe and confusion. "Same angle, same origin point." "Ares still can't identify the shooter?" Thorne demanded. "Negative, sir. The system is reading the entire sector as empty." The general's gaze cut toward Reed. "We don't have assets in that zone, do we?" Reed's expression didn't change. "Not officially." Thorne's eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" Before Reed could answer, Mercer spoke up from her station, her voice level, but carrying a quiet current of defiance. "Sir, those strikes are coming from within 2 kilometers of Captain Winter's last known position." Thorne blinked at her, then shook his head. That's impossible. She'd be deep in enemy territory, and their sensors would have picked her up instantly. Mercer didn't look away. Unless she's using something their sensors can't see. The room's attention snapped back to the map as another target vanished. This time, an enemy mobile command post. The effect was immediate. The remaining red icons wavered, movements jerky and inconsistent. Radio intercepts crackled over the speakers. Command is down. Repeat, command is down. Secure the sector. We have a breach in our perimeter. It was the kind of chaos a battlefield commander dreamed of inflicting. The moment when the enemy's coordinated plan dissolved into fragmented reactions. Thorne's jaw tightened. I want answers, Commander. Now. Reed hesitated only a moment before nodding toward the conference room off to the side. We'll speak privately, sir. Inside the smaller room, the noise of the command center dulled to a low murmur. Reed keyed a secure terminal, entering an access code few in the theater of operations possessed. You're not going to like this, he warned. I already don't, Thorne replied. Explain. Captain Winters is part of a classified test program. Experimental counter-detection technology. The Umbra system. Reed's voice was even, but his eyes stayed on the general's reaction. It exploits the blind spots in surveillance AI, ours and the enemy's. If the system doesn't know how to categorize what it sees, it stops tracking it. Thorne stared at him. You're telling me she's invisible to both sides? Not invisible, Reed corrected. Overlooked. The system decides she's not relevant and stops paying attention. She's there in the data, just ignored. That's insane. Why wasn't I briefed? Need-to-know basis. This is Umbra's first live deployment. Her assignment to that observation post was just cover. She infiltrated behind enemy lines before the battle began. In the command center, the pattern was becoming obvious. Each strike wasn't random. Winters was cutting the enemy's brain and nervous system apart, one precision kill at a time. A feed from a high-altitude drone caught one of the missile launches, a faint streak of heat from a rocky hillside, too small to trigger an automated alarm. The weapon itself was unremarkable, a shoulder-fired anti-tank missile any infantry unit could carry. What was remarkable was where it was fired from, a location Ares displayed as empty terrain. Mercer leaned toward Reed as he returned. Sir, she's dismantling them in a sequence: command, control, air defense, logistics. She's not just harassing them. She's hunting them. Reed didn't argue. Keep tracking her vector, but do it manually. No system queries. If Umbra works as designed, even our own algorithms won't hold on to her image for more than a few seconds. By 0430 hours, the once dense enemy formation was a mess of scattered units and panic movements. Some vehicles were retreating to protect their flanks, others surging forward without orders. On the intercept channel, a voice shouted over static. We have an American inside our formation. Find her. The tension in the command center shifted. Officers who'd barely registered Winters' name during planning were now tracking the ghostly trail of destruction she left behind. Ares still refuses to acknowledge any friendly unit in that sector, the surveillance officer reported. That's the point, Mercer said quietly. Another strike. The enemy's mobile communications relay vanished in a fireball. Reed allowed himself the smallest smile. Thorne leaned closer to the display, his earlier skepticism giving way to something else. Respect mixed with disbelief. One operator. Against an armored division. Not just an operator, Reed replied. An operator the enemy can't prove exists. Out in the valley, Winters was already on the move again. She carried no heavy pack now, only what she needed for her next shot. Each position was temporary. Each attack was followed by immediate relocation. She knew the enemy was sweeping for her. She could hear their engines in the distance, the grind of treads over loose rock. But she moved like smoke through the terrain, always where she shouldn't be, never where they looked. Her comms were silent. No reports, no requests for orders. She didn't need them. The mission had shifted from observation to full disruption, and she intended to finish it. In the command center, The enemy's collapse was no longer theoretical. Their southern push had stalled entirely, the main column splitting as commanders tried to re-establish communications. Mercer updated the latest strike list. 14 high-value targets either destroyed or abandoned in place. Thorne exhaled through his nose. "I owe her an apology." "You can deliver it when we bring her home," Reed said, though privately. He wondered how many kilometers she'd have to move, and how much more chaos she'd unleash before that happened. By 0500 hours, the battlefield had taken on an entirely different shape than the one projected in the pre-battle simulations. Ares had predicted a methodical enemy advance, pressure on the northern and southern approaches, and a 60+% probability of Allied defenses being breached within 3 hours. Instead, the projection now looked like someone had dragged a claw through the enemy's formation, severing its arteries. Vehicles that should have been surging forward were idling or reversing course. Command relays were dark. The red markers on the map no longer moved in neat patterns, but in frantic, jagged bursts. Reed had seen battle plans unravel before, but never this quickly, and never from the inside out. General Thorne stood at the central console, leaning forward, hands braced against the edge. He had abandoned his earlier posture of detached authority. His eyes followed every ripple in the enemy's disarray. "Tell me exactly what this Umbra thing is," he said at last, voice low but sharp. Reed keyed the secure terminal again. Only now did he allow himself to speak freely. "The Umbra system isn't just hardware. It's a methodology. The hardware creates what's called a perceptual blind spot, a space where the data still exists in surveillance feeds, but the AI categorizes it as irrelevant. Not hostile. Not worth tracking." Thorne frowned. "You're saying the system sees her, but ignores her?" "Exactly. Sensors detect a heat signature, a figure moving through terrain. But if the signature doesn't match a profile the system's programmed to recognize as a threat, it's filtered out. And humans monitoring those feeds tend to trust the AI more than their own instincts." Thorne shook his head. "That's insanity. That's genius. It's also risky as hell," Reed added, "because it works both ways. Our own systems don't keep her on their radar. She's as much a ghost to us as she is to them." The enemy seemed to be realizing that ghost was very real. Radio intercepts filled the command center with panicked fragments. "She's inside our perimeter. Sector 12 clear, negative, contact. Contact. We can't pin her down." The voices were clipped, frantic. Even without translation, the fear was evident. Mercer, who had been tracking Winters manually through painstaking cross-referencing of drone shadows, satellite stills, and occasional infrared anomalies, leaned toward Reed. "She's moving in a pattern. Every time she hits a target, she shifts 2 clicks laterally, never backtracking, never lingering more than 7 minutes in one spot." Reed nodded. Classic infiltration doctrine, but optimized for a battlefield swarming with sensors. "She's adapting on the fly." At 0523 hours, a new explosion tore through the projection. This time, the enemy's forward fuel depot. The blast lit up the dark terrain on satellite feeds, a brief sunburst in the pre-dawn gloom. The resulting shockwave on the map was instantaneous. Multiple red icons slowed or stopped entirely, cut off from the fuel they needed to keep moving. "She's crippling their logistics now," Mercer observed. "Once they can't move, they're dead steel." Thorne straightened. "We have to extract her before they throw everything they have into finding her." Reed's eyes flicked to the map. "If we pull her now, the gap closes. They recover some control." "She's already turned the tide, Commander." Reed hesitated. "Give her one more cycle. She's not finished." Out in the field, Winters crouched low behind a shattered boulder, watching the smoke curl skyward from the depot. The blast had drawn enemy search teams like ants to spilled sugar. That was fine. She was already gone, slipping through a dry gulch that would mask her movement from overhead thermal scans. Her rifle was slung across her back, her hands free as she moved. Every step was deliberate, her profile kept low against the ridgeline. Twice she froze completely as enemy patrols passed within 50 meters, their helmet-mounted HUDs sweeping over her without recognition. To them, she wasn't even there. By 0600, the enemy was fractured beyond repair. Their southern advance had collapsed. The northern push was reduced to small, disjointed movements. Ares calculated their operational effectiveness at under 30%, a number Reed suspected was optimistic. Thorne finally exhaled, a long, slow release of tension. I misjudged her, he admitted, his voice quiet. Mercer didn't look up from her console. She anticipated that, sir. Being underestimated was part of her plan. Thorne glanced at her. What makes you say that? She told me before she left. Luck is a variable she tries to eliminate. I think she counts people's expectations in the same category. A comms tech turned in his chair. Intercepted enemy chatter. They're ordering a full retreat from the valley. They've lost too much command and logistics capability to continue. Mark the time, Reed ordered. And flag all destroyed assets for post-battle analysis. Another voice from the comms pit. Sir, secondary transmission. Direct line encrypted. Origin point matches last recorded activity from Captain Winters. The room went still. Reed stepped forward. Put it through. The voice was calm, steady, completely devoid of strain. Echo protocol complete. 14 high-value targets neutralized. Requesting extraction. Grid Tango 7-3. Thorne didn't hesitate. Priority extraction. I'm leading the team myself. Reed raised an eyebrow. That's unusual for a general, sir. Thorne's jaw set. I dismissed her role before this began. I need to see for myself what one operator accomplished against an armored division. In 30 minutes, a small, fast-moving extraction convoy was carving its way through the recovering battlefield. Smoke still hung in the air. The horizon glowed faintly from burning wrecks. They found her exactly where she'd said she'd be, sitting on a rock outcrop, helmet off, the faint dawn light catching in her hair. Her gear was neatly arranged beside her, compact, unfamiliar devices without a single military serial number. She stood and saluted as Thorne approached. Captain Winters, he said, pausing as if searching for the right words. That was an exceptional operation. Did we hold the valley? She asked. We did. Thanks to you. She nodded once, then began packing her equipment. I owe you an apology, Captain, Thorne continued. You made a tactical assessment based on the data you had. She replied without looking up. That's standard protocol. Nevertheless, I was wrong. She finally met his gaze. With respect, sir, being underestimated was essential to the mission's success. The convoy rolled out before the sun fully cleared the ridgeline, engines low, tires whispering across the broken earth. Smoke trailed from the valley like old breath, and the wind pushed it in slow ribbons through the gullies. Captain Elise Winters rode in the second vehicle, helmet in her lap, eyes closed for the first time in 16 hours. She wasn't sleeping. She was listening, counting the rhythm of the engine, the chatter on the encrypted net, the occasional pop of cooling metal from wrecks they passed. Her mind sorted every sound into threat or not threat, habit drilled too deep to stop. General Thorne sat opposite her, hands braced on the seat frame as the vehicle bounced. He had removed his gloves, but didn't seem to realize it, knuckles whitening every time they hit a rut. Twice he started to speak. Twice he stopped. At last, your system, Umbra. How long have you trained with it? Winters opened her eyes. 2 years since the prototype. 8 months on the current revision. And you trusted it enough to go dark inside an armored division. I trust my preparation, she said. The system is a tool. Thorne studied her face as if the answer were hidden there. You know, when we briefed this operation, I thought your assignment was ceremonial. It was, Winters said. Ceremonies are useful. They tell the wrong story to the right people. He gave a sharp, humorless breath that might have been a laugh. You anticipated my reaction. I anticipated everyone's, she replied. That was the point. The driver called back, crossing friendly line in 60 seconds. The vehicle slowed, and the world outside changed with it. The wrecks gave way to hasty earthworks and barricades, faces under camo paint, the heavy smell of fuel and hot steel. Soldiers turned as the convoy eased through. Some lifted hands in quiet salutes. Others simply stared. Word had gotten ahead of them the way it always does when something unbelievable happens. A rumor in a war zone can run faster than any vehicle. They stopped under the shadow of a camo net strung between two antenna masts at Forward Operating Base Horizon. The air here carried a different weight: burnt coffee, disinfectant, sweat, and a thin metallic tang from the generator yard. Winters stepped out, shouldered her pack, and waited. Thorne dropped down beside her. "Debrief first," he said. "Then medical. Then sleep." "I can invert the order if you want," Winters said, straight-faced. He almost smiled. "Let's try professional norms, just this once." Inside the operations compound, the world resumed its clipped pace. Doors hissed open and shut. Radios murmured behind glass. The Ares projection still hovered above the central table. Now a quiet constellation of blue markers spread across the valley. Red icons were sparse, most marked with an X. Someone had already annotated the overlay with engagement complete in neat, military text. The battlefield looked tidy from here. It never did on the ground. Commander Nathan Reed met them at the threshold. His gaze flicked from Thorne to Winters and softened by a degree you could feel. "Captain." "Sir." Lieutenant Octavia Mercer stood a step behind, hands folded, expression composed. Winters noted the faint shadows under her eyes, fatigue poorly disguised by discipline. Mercer's head dipped, the subtle acknowledgement of professionals who'd been tracking the same invisible thread all night. "Conference 3, Reed said, leading them down the corridor. The room they entered was windowless, walls lined with acoustic panels and 2 secure terminals. A pitcher of water sat on the table with 4 glasses. No ceremonial flags. No cameras. The kind of room where truths existed briefly and then never again. Reed remained standing. "Captain Winters, this is a closed session, Umbra access only. Please walk us through from infiltration to extraction. We'll handle technical analysis after." Winters set her pack on the table, unclipped the top flap, and removed a tablet with an unmarked casing. It came alive at her touch with a plain, text-only interface. No flashy dashboards, no AI summaries. She projected a minimal overlay onto the wall, a crude path through the valley with silent time stamps. "Entry at 1800 hours yesterday," she began. "I initiated Echo Protocol after reaching my assigned observation post. The coordinates on record were accurate and irrelevant. From there, I moved along this ridgeline. Umbra algorithms were tuned to downgrade my thermal signature against known wildlife profiles. The goal wasn't invisibility, it was categorization as uninteresting." Mercer nodded, murmuring, "Managed irrelevance." Winters continued. Enemy scouts swept the western approaches with quadcopter drones. Their filters were tuned to human gait and equipment patterns. I matched my movement rates to a filtered band, too steady for fauna, too inconsistent for trained infantry, then broke pattern at intervals to reclassify as background. I know their doctrine. They rely on hierarchical filters because constant alarms degrade operator performance. Thorne leaned in. "You counted on their trust in the system. I counted on the human need for quiet." She tapped the first marker. "Initial strike here, enemy command vehicle. Javelin equivalent. I launched from an oblique angle outside the most common counter-battery calculations. Time on target coincided with their planned push to maximize disruption." Reed's eyes narrowed. They staggered immediately after. "Command nodes do 2 jobs," Winter said. "They order and they reassure. When you remove both functions, people become convinced the map is lying." She took them through each subsequent shot: air defense, forward recon, communications, relay, logistics. Each time, her voice remained flat, almost clinical, as if narrating someone else's work. The pattern emerged like a slow reveal. Hit the eyes, cut the tongue, take the spine. Reed watched without interrupting. Mercer asked 3 precise questions, nothing about heroics, only about timing, wind exposure, and why Winters chose one rock shelf over another. Thorne listened hardest when Winters described the moments between strikes. The crawl through shale while engines groaned not 50 meters away, the pauses in dry creek beds until dust settled from patrolling tracks, the method for letting a helmet HUD look directly through you. It's not the device alone, she said. You learn how the system thinks, and then you behave like something it believes you are. Thorne folded his arms. You make that sound simple. It isn't. She let the pause sit. But neither is relying on a picture that tells you everything at once. When she finished, no one spoke. The silence was not empty. It was full of recalculation. Reed cleared his throat. Results: 14 high-value targets neutralized. Estimated operational degradation to enemy force, 70+%. Valley secured. Allied casualties lower than projected by 41%. He looked at Winters. You changed the math. Winters capped the tablet and stowed it. The math was always human. We just stopped admitting it. Mercer's gaze flicked to Thorne. He seemed smaller in the chair now, not diminished, but scaled back to something more human. Captain, he said, I owe you a formal apology. My earlier assessment was useful, Winters said, not unkindly. Assumptions are predictable. Predictable things are exploitable. That cuts both ways. He considered that, then inclined his head. Understood. A knock sounded. Reed keyed the door. A senior intelligence officer stepped in, gray hair, unimpressed expression. A civilian followed. No insignia, no name badge, the kind of presence that lived in funding lines rather than command rosters. The intel chief spoke first. We've compiled preliminary battle damage and intercept analysis. If Umbra scales, strategic implications are significant. The civilian placed a slim folder on the table. We propose formalizing Umbra as a standing capability. Dedicated teams. Doctrine integration. Procurement lines. Thorne looked from the folder to Winters. You just got back, he said quietly. We're already building a monument around your footprints. Winters' face didn't change. If you build a monument, people will stare at it. Build a door instead. The civilian blinked. A door to what? To a place the map doesn't show, she said. The intel chief shifted topics with the weariness of a man who had seen too many good ideas flattened by committees. Motivation matters for selection, he said to Winters. Why did you volunteer for this in the first place? Reed almost cut him off, but Winters answered. 2 years ago, I lost a team when an operation was compromised, she said, voice low and even. We trusted our picture. The enemy had a copy of it. We believed we were hidden because the system told us so. We stopped believing in the people beside us. She set a hand on the pack as if it were a living thing. Umbra isn't rebellion against technology. It's a reminder. Tools amplify humans. They don't replace them. Mercer's posture eased, something like relief behind her eyes. Reed looked down at the table for a long moment, then up again. We'll need training protocols, doctor notes, countermeasures. If we can exploit this gap, someone else can too. Then teach commanders to question silence, Winters said. Teach them that no contact is a statement about an algorithm, not the world. The civilian slid the folder to Thorne. Pilot unit. 6 operators. We'd like Captain Winters to lead. Winters didn't look at the folder. I'm more effective in the field. That's exactly why we need you selecting and shaping people like you, Thorne said. Otherwise, we'll turn this into another button on a console and tell ourselves it's solved. A small smile touched the corner of Winters' mouth and vanished. People like me are inconvenient to organizations. Reed answered before anyone else could. So is winning. The intel chief collected his notes. We'll reconvene at 1900 for the technical annex. Captain, medical is waiting. Commander, General, there's a press blackout to maintain and a dozen commanders asking why their feeds missed half a battle. They filed out until only Reed and Winters remained. He reached for the pitcher, poured 2 glasses, and slid one to her. You did what technology said couldn't be done, he said. She took the water. Technology didn't say it was impossible. People did. Reed chuckled softly. Fair. I'll add that to the doctrine. She tilted her head. Don't write doctrine about me. Right doctrine about doubt. He nodded once, serious again. Rest. That's an order. Winters stood, shouldered the pack, and paused at the door. Commander, she said, Ares will adapt. The enemy will adapt faster. What we did today won't work the same way twice. I know, he said. That's why I need you here when the next map lies. Outside, the base moved with the tired grace of survivors. A medic glanced up as Winters entered the clinic and gestured toward a cot. She sat, let a cuff bite her arm, watched numbers stabilize on a screen. The medic made polite conversation. Winters answered with the minimal syllables of someone whose words had already been spent where they mattered. When she finally stepped back into the corridor, the air had warmed. The distant clang of a mess line drifted through the concrete. She passed a window slit that framed the valley like a painting. From here, it looked peaceful. She knew better. Peace is just a moment when no one has yet decided to break something. Mercer was waiting near the exit, a slim file under her arm. I pulled your comms intervals, she said, falling into step beside Winters. The irregularity was that you telegraphing blind spot without saying it? Winters gave a single nod. Mercer's smile reached her eyes this time. Clockwork approves. They walked in silence for a few paces. Captain, Mercer said, when they build your unit, I want in. You just volunteered, Winters replied. Report to selection when the door opens. Mercer looked puzzled. What door? Winters glanced back toward the conference room. The one they're learning to build. She turned toward the barracks then, letting the noise of the base swallow her. Somewhere behind her, decisions were being drafted into policy. Somewhere ahead, sleep waited like a rare permission. Between the two, she allowed herself a single, private breath, the kind you take when a fight is over and the next one hasn't started yet. It lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then she moved on. The training facility was so far off any map that even its satellite images were doctored. From above, it looked like dry scrubland with a few utility sheds. On the ground, buried beneath layers of false terrain and radar-baffling structures, it was a self-contained world built for one purpose: to erase people from perception without erasing them from reality. Captain Elise Winters stood at the head of the small briefing room. No flags here. No ceremonial banners. Just a white wall with a single phrase stenciled in black. The most dangerous place on a battlefield is where everyone is certain nothing exists. 5 new operators sat in front of her. They didn't look like the kind of soldiers recruitment posters loved. No uniformity of height, build, or background. That was deliberate. Each had been handpicked not for muscle mass or perfect marksmanship, but for cognitive agility, independent thinking, and an ability to see patterns where others saw static. Specialist Abernathy sat in the second row, posture a little too stiff, still wearing the surprise of his invitation. Beside him, a wiry woman with a demolitions background drummed her fingers against her knee. 2 seats over, a quiet man in civilian hiking gear studied the stenciled phrase as if memorizing it for an exam. Winters didn't waste time with introductions. You're here because you've all done something the algorithms couldn't explain. You saw what didn't fit and acted anyway. That's the seed of what Umbra does. She reached to her wrist, tapped a recess control, and the room's biometric sensors hiccuped. The overhead panel that counted occupants dropped from 6 to 5. To the system, Winters said, I no longer exist in this room. There was no shimmer, no science fiction fade out. She was simply still there, and at the same time, officially not. This, she continued, isn't invisibility. It's exploitation of a flaw in how we think about security. Machines filter what they see. People trust the filter. Over the next weeks, the candidates learned the language of those flaws. They studied how AI threat recognition systems categorized movement, heat signatures, electromagnetic emissions. They learned that every sensor had a bias, a preference, a threshold below which it became lazy. In the first field exercise, they moved through a mock village seeded with motion detectors and cameras. Traditional stealth failed within minutes. The systems caught them every time, until Winters made them change the game. You're not avoiding detection. she told them as they crouched in the dirt between failures. You're convincing the system you're something else. Something it already decided doesn't matter. Abernathy cracked the problem first. He slowed his stride to match the irregular pace of the stray dogs that roamed the site. The system's filter logged him as fauna, non-threat, and quietly removed him from the alert feed. Winters didn't congratulate him. One victory is a pattern waiting to be recognized. Next time, the system will adjust. You have to keep changing your silhouette. By the third month, the group was moving differently. They no longer thought of stealth as crouching and shadow hugging. Instead, they experimented with pacing, posture, even how they carried weight. They learned to be the false positives that systems dismissed, the gust of wind that rattled a tarp, the heat flare of a sun-warmed rock. Training was as much mental as physical. Winters ran exercises where they had to navigate an obstacle course blindfolded, guided only by sound and touch, to strip away their reliance on digital overlays. She made them analyze their own body language on video, looking for tells that might trigger human suspicion even if the machine looked away. Some days, they left the field with scraped palms and torn gear, convinced they were making no progress. Other days, they breezed past layers of surveillance, without a single alarm. Winters kept her. Feedback minimal, precise where it mattered, withholding where she knew frustration was the best teacher. Midway through training, Winters staged an unannounced infiltration. The candidates were in the mess hall when she triggered the base's internal lockdown. Security lights flashed. Guards swept the corridors. The PA announced, "Intruder detected in the command wing." The recruits were certain it was an exercise for them, until they learned the intruder was Winters herself. The command wing's Ares terminal had flagged movement, but categorized it as maintenance crew, thanks to a uniform she'd borrowed from storage and a set of gate parameters mimicking the base janitor. When she joined them back in the mess, no one spoke. Finally, Abernathy said, "You didn't beat the system. You convinced it you were part of its plan." Winters gave a single approving nod. Exactly. Their capstone test came in the 6th month. The objective: infiltrate a fully active military base equipped with the latest Ares software and plant trackers in the command center. The base had been told there would be a security test sometime that month, but no date or method. The team split into pairs. Abernathy and his partner slipped along a drainage ditch, triggering low-level motion alerts, so frequently the system began treating them as environmental noise. Another pair mimicked the pattern of supply runners moving between storage and motor pools, complete with empty crates as props. By 0430 hours, all trackers were in place. No alerts had been raised. Guards had walked past them, eyes sliding over bodies their HUDs didn't acknowledge. At 0800, the base commander was shown the feed. 5 glowing tracker signals blinked from the heart of his secure command center. His first reaction was disbelief. Impossible. We'd have seen them. No, Winters said. Your system saw them. It just didn't believe itself. Back at the hidden facility, the recruit sat in the debriefing room, still riding the quiet adrenaline of success. Winters stood in front of them, hands clasped behind her back. Umbra works, she said, because it isn't about gadgets. It's about understanding the gap between detection and recognition. That gap exists because humans build systems to make decisions for them. When the system says nothing's there, we believe it. Your job is to live in that gap long enough to do what needs doing. She scanned their faces one by one. You've all proven you can operate there. But remember, every system you fool will adapt. And the moment you believe you're untouchable, you're already in someone else's crosshairs. Abernathy raised his hand. What's our first mission? Winters allowed the faintest flicker of a smile. We're going to visit an enemy command center that thinks its version of Ares makes it untouchable. We're going to prove otherwise. Night draped the mountains in a patient dark, the kind that lets sound travel farther than light. Inside a low-slung operations hut, 6 operators stood around a table that wasn't a hologram, wasn't connected to any network, and didn't even have a power cable. It was a laminated paper map, creased and smudged.
weighted at the corners with spent brass. Captain Elise Winters traced a fingertip along a narrow arroyo marked in pencil. Ingress here. No sensors for the first 400 meters. Too many false positives from wind eddies. After that, we enter a filtered corridor. Remember, we don't avoid detection. We choreograph it. 5 nods. No one asked for the 5th repetition. They drilled this path until it lived in their muscles. Specialist Abernathy tapped the legend. Enemy Ares analog? Less sophisticated than ours, Winters said. But the same bad habits. Overweight to vehicle profiles, conservative on human movement below thigh-high heat signatures. They tell themselves it reduces fatigue for guards. They're not wrong. It also builds a hole. A wiry demolitions expert named Rana tilted her head. We plug the hole or crawl through it. We build a door inside it, Winters said. And only we know the handle. No one smiled. The team had learned their instructor's rhythms well enough to hear the dry humor even when her face stayed neutral. She clicked off the headlamp. The hut returned to darkness. Masks on. Radio silence unless compromised. If you must speak, speak like a rumor. They moved. The forward operating base they were stealing from didn't look impressive. Prefabs, HESCO walls, a web of antennae combed back against the sky. Its confidence lived in a server rack, not in concrete. The enemy's Ares derivative, call sign Argus, pulled in feeds from perimeter cams, quadcopters, acoustic mics, badge readers, a dozen other eyes that never blinked. On any normal night, that would be enough. Winters took point, dropping into the arroyo like a stone. The team followed at intervals precise enough to be chaotic. Deliberate irregularity. A rhythm no sensor wanted to learn. At the first bend, a tripod cam watched the wash. Winters stood up in full view, then didn't move at all. Her heat signature bled into the background as the umber nodes at her shoulders gently cooled the pattern edges. The camera flagged a motion delta, considered the classification, and quietly filed it under environmental drift. A leaf that was also a person. 2 pairs slipped past her on opposite banks, splitting and rejoining in a pattern Argus had already decided was wind. At the wash's mouth, a chain-link gate sat ajar. Inside, a guard leaned against his post, helmet HUD painting the night with helpful boxes. He glanced lazily through the fence as Rana and her partner drifted by, carrying an empty crate labeled power supply like 2 bored technicians. The guard's display supplied a convenient fiction. Maintenance crew on night shift. He saw what he expected, a service loop closing itself. So he stopped looking. Abernathy and Winters cut left, skirting a motor pool. A patrol truck crawled along the row. Abernathy let it pass within 10 meters. His head tilted just enough for his face to break the camera's facial angle. The Argus filter, biased against logging unknowns, unless 3 criteria matched, discarded him as a low-confidence hit. Inside the command building, air vibrated with fan hum. The corridor smelled like plastic and citrus cleaner. A camera over the door blinked its steady LED, alive, attentive, incurious. Winters halted at an intersection. 3 paths, stairwell, server room, command floor. From a pouch, she withdrew 5 wafer-thin discs, trackers with no serial numbers and no manufacturer, only a sliver of memory and a temperamental battery. She pressed one into Abernathy's palm. Plant, verify, leave. If you linger, you become real. He nodded and flowed into the stairwell without a footfall to his name. Rana ghosted toward the server room. Winters took the command floor. The nerve center looked exactly like every nerve center, a glow of screens, a coffee ring that no one would ever claim, officers with headsets, and the posture of people trying to inhabit 2 places at once. A wall display showed the base perimeter like a heartbeat, motion traces, thermal overlays, alert stacks. In the middle of it all, a gray box pulsed gently. Argus status, optimal. Winters walked across the room. Not quickly, not slowly, not like a threat. She carried a clipboard, blank. The body remembers authority if you hold a clipboard and don't look at people. 3 heads turned toward her, glanced down at their HUD notes, and turned back to their screens. Harmonized dismissal. She stopped by the console rack and knelt as if tightening a cable tie. Her hand slid behind the conduit, tracker adhered, whisper soft. She stood, pivoted, set the second under a desk lip. Nothing beeped. Nothing wanted to beep. Elsewhere, alarms were born every minute and raised by no one. On the big display, a patrol drone sketched an idle circle. For a breath, its camera caught Winters, full frame. The software drew its neat box, hesitated, as if about to remember her, and then demoted the box to non-actionable presence. She stepped back into the corridor, shoulders looser now in the small way that looks like confidence and is really timing. Abernathy was there first, eyes bright with a kind of quiet surprise he always tried to hide. "Two placed," he breathed. Winters nodded. 3 down. She checked her watch. "We exit on the minute." Rana appeared a beat later, wiping imaginary dust from her hands. "Server room is allergic to us." "Good," Winters said. "Let's make the rest of the base sneeze." Exfiltration is a crueler art than entry. You leave against gravity, attention wanting a reason to find you now that the operation is almost over. Umbra doctrine preached one more sleight of mind. Give the system something else to think about. At the motor pool, Winters palmed a remote and tapped twice. Across the compound, for low sensitivity mic spiked as wind chimes they'd hung earlier began to tinkle from a utility yard. Argus elevated the acoustic anomaly and lowered everything else a notch to stay within operator bandwidth. Humans, like one problem at a time. The team retraced the arroyo, switching sides and stride length midstream, so that Argus reinforced its earlier classification rather than creating a new one. By the last bend, Winters could hear the bass chirping, tiny housekeeping alerts stacked like leaves at a fence. The kind that makes security chiefs say, "Filter them. Filter them all." They vanished into the scrub the way they had arrived, as if they'd never been. Back at the hut, they waited for dawn. Operations often end this way. No cheering. Just the slow return of color to the world, and a log entry that reads clean. At 0800 hours, a secure line opened. On the other end, the enemy base commander learned about 5 signals blinking from inside his command center. He said the thing people always say. Impossible. Winters didn't respond. She wasn't on the call. But when the gist reached her, she poured coffee into a metal mug and said to no one in particular, "The map is not the ground." The team debriefed with their usual economy. Where did the filters help? Where did they almost hurt you? What would you change if the system learned this trick tomorrow? Every answer fed into a handbook that was less a manual and more a collection of cautions. By afternoon, the intelligence haul from the trackers turned into prevention. 3 planned strikes against supply lines quietly unmade by rerouted convoys, and an air tasking order that never took off. The success did not trend on any network. It lived in absence. 3 things that did not happen and therefore would not be remembered. 2 weeks later, orders arrived in a crisp folder without a logo. Umbra would expand. 3 new teams. More training cadres. A liaison cell inserted into doctrine shops with a mandate to teach commanders something that can't be measured well. Doubt. General Thorne flew in for the announcement. He stood on a bare patch of concrete and addressed the 6 operators like a man aware words should be used sparingly around people who work in silence. "Your proof of concept exceeded projections," he said. The Joint Chiefs authorized a program build-out. "Captain Winters, you're promoted to Director of Umbra." He let that hang. "You'll have authority over selection, training, and deployment." The team didn't shift. If they felt pride, they kept it where it belonged. Winters' reply was simple. "I'm most effective in the field." Thorne held her gaze. "Your effect now is to make more of you. If we don't codify what you've learned, we'll make a gadget, not a capability." He wasn't wrong. She knew it. He knew she knew it. Leadership is sometimes choosing the fight only you can have. "Then we do this carefully," she said. "Small units. Long selection. No shortcuts. The first time someone tries to scale this with a login button, you've already lost." Agreed. Mercer, now wearing new captain's bars and a small, satisfied fatigue, slid a folder across the table. "Initial candidate pool. I filtered for cognitive diversity and a healthy disrespect for dashboards." Winters paged through the profiles. A line of graphite reappeared in her mind, the stenciled phrase on the training room wall. She'd always suspected it came from a soldier who learned it the hard way. "Start with 12, she said. "We'll keep 6. I want a week alone with them before any sensors touch them." Thor nodded. "Granted." He offered a small velvet box like an afterthought. Inside, a medal that would never be worn in public. Winters closed it gently and returned it. "I don't need the weight," she said. "It's not for the ribbon," Thorne replied. "It's for the record, even a hidden one." She left the box on the table. Records were things that got queried. Queries were things that could be stolen. Back at Forward Operating Base Horizon, Commander Reed found a pale envelope on his desk. No markings, no metadata. Physical paper felt like contraband. He broke the seal and found a single line in tidy handwriting. "The most dangerous weapon isn't the one with the most firepower. It's the one no one accounts for until it's too late." Below it, a small sketch, a 6-point snowflake. He smiled without showing his teeth and fed the page into the burn bag. Smoke lifted, brief and private. He knew better than to keep souvenirs in a world that cataloged everything. Outside, the valley moved through another ordinary afternoon. Convoys on the road, drone shadows gliding over gravel, an officer cursing a jammed printer with the intensity usually reserved for enemies. War continued, more spreadsheet than spectacle, until it wasn't. Winters stood on a catwalk above the training yard, watching the new candidates jog the perimeter, without music, without cadence calls. Their steps were out of sync by design, a pattern the cameras wouldn't like. Mercer joined her, coffee in hand. "They don't look like much," she said, deadpan. "Good," Winters replied. "That's the point." Director Winters, Mercer tested, a faint grin in the title. Elise didn't flinch at the new weight of the word. "Doors before monuments," she said. "Always." The sun edged down, turning the dirt a soft bronze. Somewhere, an algorithm refined itself. Somewhere else, a human trusted it a little more than yesterday. And on a small, disciplined patch of ground, 6 people learned to live in the space between what the machine detected and what a person believed. A narrow gap. A dangerous one. The future of war wasn't bigger bombs or brighter screens. It was quieter, an adjustment of attention, a recalibration of certainty. Winters watched the line break and reform, uneven, unremarkable, exactly wrong to the eye. She kept her hands on the rail until the light thinned to wire. Then she went downstairs to teach them how to disappear.